But first, more on the Islamic terror preachers in Australia. While the Prime Minister's been dancing and wearing flowers in his hair, spruiking Australia's climate credentials in the Cook Islands, in the latest bid for Labor to host its new vanity project, COP31, the Climate Jamboree, at home his government is failing to show leadership where it's needed. The war in Gaza may not quite have produced civil unrest in Australia, but here and elsewhere, it's produced an absolutely unprecedented outpouring of race hate against Jewish people. On October 7, Hamas terrorists, deliberately and in cold blood, slaughtered nearly 1,500 Israelis, killing children in front of their parents, and then whole families in scenes of indescribable horror. Yet to tens of thousands of people protesting and marching here, it's as if they're all saying it's Israel's fault and that the Jews were somehow asking for it. Now, almost as bad, you've got signs like this around Melbourne University, where across a poster of an Israeli taken as a Hamas hostage is the lie that what happened a month ago is somehow a fiction, or as this sticker reads, Zionist propaganda. Now, it's fair enough to demand that the Israeli government do its best to minimise civilian casualties, among those that Hamas is now using as human shields, and to seek a humanitarian pause in military operations to allow food and water into Gaza. But in no reasonable moral universe is there any equivalence whatsoever between the Hamas death cult and the Israeli armed forces now trying to deal with it. Yet here in Australia, it seems, and I stand to be corrected if they have, but I can't find a single Muslim authority that has condemned the butchery by Hamas. Indeed, Muslim preacher after preacher has celebrated it, and tens of thousands of Australians, many recent migrants, but others just ignorant, muddled and nasty, have marched in support of it. Here's one.
I'm smiling and I'm happy. I'm elated. It's a day of courage. It's a day of happiness. It's a day of pride. It's a day of victory. This is the day we've been waiting for.
Here is another.
The jihad is the solution for the ummah. There is no other way. Jihad is part of our deen and one of the highest pillars of our deen. Hamas is mujahideen and freedom fighters and warriors.
Seriously, Hamas, a listed terror organisation, and he calls them warriors. Here's another.
To the invading Jews we say, by Allah, the day you will be kicked out of Palestine is coming. A day when the stones and the trees will speak and say, "O Muslim, there is a Jew behind me, come and kill him."
Indeed, this hate preacher, formerly known as Wasim Hadid, has a history of inciting hatred going back 2 decades. And then to our great shame, here are the crowds.
Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews? Where's the Jews?
But lest anyone think that these are just unrepresentative extremists, the Grand Mufti of Australia, the Islamic equivalent of the Anglican Primate or President of the Catholic Bishops' Conference, so Australia's foremost Muslim leader, in a post just 3 days after the Hamas atrocity, blamed Israel for what had happened. The central issue at stake, he said, and this is Dr. Ibrahim Abu Muhammad, in this bloody iteration of violence, is not about Hamas, but rather about the innocent Palestinian people who have been oppressed for more than 70 years. He went on to talk of, and I quote, the brilliance of that every measure of resistance takes on with their boldness and their innovations, saying, and I quote, the blood of martyrs will smell of musk because his will never breaks and his resolve never fails. Now, to be clear, this is Australia's leading Muslim cleric praising the Hamas terrorists. It's little wonder that 102 Australian Holocaust survivors today issued a statement that's worth citing at some length. They said, never did we think that we would witness a reenactment of the senseless and virulent hatred of Jews that we faced in Europe. The actions of Hamas, they said, are so familiar, so barbaric. Yet instead of condemning this, the response across the globe is a shameful spike in anti-Semitism. Our memories and our experiences in ghettos, concentration camps, and in hiding, seeing our families and our communities vanish, compel us to raise our voices and implore humanity to reject hatred, bigotry and violence, to recognise the agenda of Hamas, condemn it accordingly and call for the immediate release of all hostages, men, women, babies and the elderly. We cannot allow history, they said, to repeat itself. Now, to his credit, the Prime Minister initially condemned Hamas and their barbarity, and he asserted Israel's right to defend itself. But it took him almost 2 weeks to speak with the Israeli PM, and while he's constantly overseas, he's yet to make a solidarity visit to Israel, as most Western leaders have. The Education Minister, Jason Clare, well, he has condemned the hate preachers, saying there's no place for hate here in Australia. But from the other Labor cabinet ministers, also representing Western Sydney, where these hate preachers are largely based, Tony Burke and Chris Bowen, well, they have said very, very little. Now, it's just not good enough for the federal government to take next to no action against these violence-praising, hate-inciting preachers on the spurious grounds that next-to-non-existent Islamophobia is as real a danger as this rampant anti-Semitism, or citing a concern for free speech entirely at odds with Labor's normal preoccupation with misinformation. The mosques hosting these preachers must lose any grants from taxpayers that they're getting, and now. If the hate preachers are Australian citizens, Australians of convenience, not conviction, they must be prosecuted under the abundance of laws already in place against race hate and discrimination now. Prosecuted now. And if the hate preachers are on visas, they must be deported on character grounds now. Likewise, all those chanting "gas the Jews." If they're Australians, charge them. If they're not, deport them. Likewise, these now routine protests calling for the destruction of Israel. Don't let them march. Don't let them chant their hate-filled slogans. If the police could break up freedom marches during the pandemic, they should be more than capable of breaking up "Kill the Jews" marches now. There should be no place for Jew hatred here in Australia, and the federal government cannot sit on the fence. The PM needs to get home now, sort this out now.